With that, today I'm really excited to introduce to this session how MindStudio crafted a no-code pathway for RAG app builder, and our guest speaker, Dmitry and Sean.
Yeah.
Dmitry is the CEO of MindStudio, and Sean is his CTO. They built the MindStudio together. How about you just introduce yourself a little bit?
Absolutely. Yeah. Hey, super excited to join you here and chat with everyone. Yeah. So my name is Dmitry. Sean and I met 10 years ago when I was working at Google and Sean was finishing up studies at a university. And 7 years ago, I left Google and joined Sean to start MindStudio. The company is called Go Meta, but the product's called MindStudio. Before this, as I mentioned, I spent 4 years at Google. For 2.5 of those years, I ran product on 3 machine learning teams that were sort of crunching all of this implicitly collected data. Google has about, people, users, and helping to do a number of things. One is drive the adoption of, at that time, Google Plus, which was a focus for Google. And so getting people onboarded to that, doing ranking on people you may know, people you may like, feed ranking, and things of that sort. Prior to that, I was the chief technology officer of MySpace Music. Prior to that, I built 2 other venture-backed companies. One was a major competitor to YouTube called Veo, raised $70 million there in venture capital. Before that, I built an enterprise software cybersecurity company called Aconic Systems, raised $34 million for that. We had over 2 million deployed seats in enterprises. And in the mid-90s, 95 to 99, I built the web team at Fujitsu, a giant Japanese company. And Sean and I, again, have worked together for 10 years, 7 years full-time, 7.5 years on this company here.
Sean, do you have anything you want to add?
I think Dmitry mostly covered it. My background is
Cool.
much less storied.
That's awesome. Then tell us a little bit about MindStudio and what the business does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we live in obviously a very exciting time where we all now have access to these, new models that we can access directly and use. And whatever, a year and a half ago when ChatGPT came out, everybody got excited about the fact that you can just sort of prompt it to do stuff and outcomes, output. And some people might call that, sort of work product, where it can, write things and analyze things and do all that. But it became very clear to us pretty much instantly when we started playing around with ChatGPT and obviously all the other, language models and diffusion models and things like that, that like, while it's cool to be able to just like sort of from a command line interface, prompt them and get them to do something, the kind of the real power, practical uses for them need to be something sort of more powerful than people sort of writing prompts to it. And so we set off about a year and a quarter ago, to build MindStudio. And so MindStudio is a platform that allows anyone, but we're focused on enterprises, organizations, to leverage any model. We're model agnostic, so any language model or image model, code, video, whatever, any model, anything that can be called via API, and create basically sophisticated multi-step workflows that allow enterprises to build automations, process automations, to build custom business applications that are AI powered, to build specialized AI assistants for their employees. And we provide sort of the entire solution where we provide this no-code builder. I'll give you a quick demo towards the end of this webinar of how that works, and you can always go to mindstudio.ai/learn and find lots of tutorials on that, or on YouTube. So very quickly, you can learn to use this builder and create these workflows. We provide all the things that are required for enterprises to adopt this. So, granular user management, logging, archiving, compliance, things like that. We allow them to connect to any of their, data sources. And obviously, this is also where Zillis comes in as part of that. And obviously, we allow them to integrate with their entire tech stack that they already have. So basically, the typical approach enterprises take is they, discover us organically. By the way, 86% of our growth is organic. There's now over 40,000 of these AI applications that have been created with MindStudio and deployed, and giant enterprises, government agencies, thousands of SMBs. And as I said, 86% is organic. We don't have a single salesperson in the company. We're a self-service platform. And so typically how it happens is they discover us and, again, learn to use it by watching a YouTube tutorial, and then sort of look at their processes and start to realize that a bunch of things that they've been doing, manually with humans, they can just automate those. And we make it really easy and fast for them to create these AIs. The typical AI build is anywhere from like 15 minutes to a couple of hours for one person. And you can build like really, really powerful automations that, like, again, take humans out of the equation for certain parts of the workflow. And so that's the first thing you do. Once you've done that, you kind of look at the rest, the remaining thing that humans still need to be involved in, and start to realize that those employees could use really new custom business applications to help them do their work more efficiently, rather than sort of using these solutions that they were using before all the automation happened. Like deep, heavy CRM systems. For most organizations, they use only a few features of these CRM systems, but they've sort of been forced to adopt these giant systems in order to do that. Well, now they can actually rip out, oftentimes, those CRM systems and just build custom business applications for these remaining employees that have some functions that are CRM-y, but don't require these heavy CRM systems. And so automate everything that can be automated. For things that can't completely be automated, you still need employees, create custom tools for them. And then for everything else, sort of like ad hoc on demand, once in a while, I need to talk to a model and do something that's not repetitive, sort of. Instead of using sort of directly allowing employees to go to ChatGPT or Claude or any of these things, build for them very rapidly these specialized conversational assistants that behind the scenes still leverage OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, Meta, Mistral, or their own private models. Some large organizations or ones that are very sort of privacy and compliance and regulatory impacted, tend to build and run inference on premise or in private cloud. We allow them to connect to that as well. So they might be using these things, but these conversational specialized assistants perform much better than just generic ChatGPT, because they are aware of the enterprise in which they sit, and sort of the constraints of the enterprise and the sensitivities of it, and the internal data. They are aware of the job function of the person that is interacting with them, because again, they've sort of been put into that state of context so they can understand that. And therefore they require like radically less prompting and produce much better, output. And again, we make all of this really easy to do for enterprises to do it. And that's why, since launch in September of this last year, we now have over 40,000 of these AIs that have been deployed. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. But what I learned is the easier you make the product, the more complicated it's at the back end. So I would love to hear which kind of a technical challenge you face when you build this amazing application.
Yeah, I think it kind of dovetails nicely with what Dmitry was just saying, which is that the AI is very noisy as a space right now. There's so many cool things happening all the time. Every day you wake up and you hear about some new model that all of a sudden is better at getting into medical school than the last model, or here's a new vector database, or here's a new thing that does something else, or here's a new style of application or a new way to program agents to do things, and all of a sudden that's all the rage. So I think the biggest kind of technical challenge we faced actually hasn't been at the code level, hasn't been at the implementation level. It's been more about kind of looking at this amazing landscape of interesting things that are coming out and kind of first picking which ones are the ones that we think are valuable, that we want to bet on, that provide actual real value to end users, especially non-technical end users and enterprises. Like, which are the tools that are coming out are things that people can actually use, rather than, interesting demos that 2 weeks later, after we do all the implementation work, no one's going to be caring about anymore. And then taking that and transforming that kind of nerd-coded product language into something that normal people know how to use. So like, most of our end users have never even heard the term vector database before. Like, they certainly don't know what Zillis is, or are trying to make comparisons based on that. Like, they don't understand the inner workings of this. They might have heard the term, RAG thrown around somewhere and thought, oh, I need that because that's popular. And so that's kind of the level of individual that we're trying to basically play translator to, in taking these amazing core technologies and innovations and bringing them to ordinary people and letting them figure out what it is that they can do with them. Which is why, for example, like, some of the language you see reflected in our interfaces doesn't map one-to-one to what's happening on the back end. Like, we talk about data sources. We don't really talk about vectorization that much, aside from like in, some little progress bars here and there. But we're trying to basically take these concepts and up-level them into things that ordinary people can understand, and oftentimes, compose multiple things in the back end of our system into some new product that, from a non-technical end user's perspective, they're going to look at and be like, oh, this is something new, but actually it's a mix of vector databases and LLM calls and other types of orchestration on the back end. Dmitry, is there anything you want to add to that, maybe?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Yeah, let me contextualize a little bit more. So again, our focus is bringing AI enablement to enterprises, to organizations. And by the way, when I use the word enterprise, I don't necessarily mean large organizations. There's thousands of small and medium-sized businesses that have built AIs using MindStudio and use them. So any kind of organization. And today these organizations find themselves, and again, we get to sit at this like really interesting vantage point because thousands of organizations are coming to us. All of it is self-serve, but some of them reach out to us and sort of we ask them questions. How did you find us? Like, what were you looking for? What were your pain points? Things like that. So we get sort of a lot of signal of like what's happening out there. And there's just a tremendous amount of excitement of like, wow, this thing is amazing. I can like prompt it to do stuff. And then confusion, like, what do I do with it? Do I need to hire a bunch of data scientists? And I also read that like there's now a shortage of H100, so I got to figure out how to procure those and build a data center and all of that. Or do I need to go and do like an RFP and go figure out which large language model we should standardize on? Or should I go and implement like some of these like vertical SaaS tools, like Writer, Jasper, Copy, and then there's others for marketing, and there's others for sales and others for operations, and how do I make those decisions? So like there's this great demand that I should be doing something with AI, otherwise my competitors using AI are going to kill me. But on the other hand, I don't know what to do with it. And so we show up and we say, look, don't worry. It's actually really simple. You can learn to use this product in an afternoon. And then no matter who you are, whether you're a developer in the company, or you are a project manager, or an HR manager, or a marketing manager. These are like the types of roles that we see discover MindStudio and begin to implement these things in their organization. And so we make it accessible and applied and allow people to solve real problems and not sort of take on this sort of a perspective of like the way you do AI is you wait for the next model to come out and you wait for like AGI, that's going to be GPT-8. And GPT-8, all you'll be able to do is say, please make my enterprise better and push send. And it will build your business plan and refactor everything, go raise money. And you say, make it $1 trillion company, and it goes and sells it for you. Like some people sort of think that this is the path to actually leveraging AI, and we say to them, look, that's silly. You can do incredible things with it now. And again, we're seeing that happening across, I think, every industry already, with these 40,000 AIs deployed. every size company, almost every country represented now, I think. Not every country.
I would also add to that that I think, and this gets back to the technical challenges, is that we provide an answer to people who have anxiety around, oh, well, if I standardize on this one tool chain today or this one model today, you know, what happens in a week when all of a sudden that's outdated? Do I need to refactor my entire business? Like, an analogy that comes to mind would be like if you got traveled back in time 50 years and had to teach people photography, and you knew that the iPhone was coming, it wouldn't be here for a while. But like, what would you teach them? Like, you wouldn't try and teach them about crazy future in the weeds things. You would teach them the basics of composition and lighting and, you know, the reason that we're doing all of this to begin with. And I think MindStudio provides a similar level of abstraction with AI application development, which is, don't worry about the model. The model's going to keep getting better and better and better. It's going to get faster. It's going to get less expensive. You know, data sources and data retrieval and all of that is going to get better and easier and more contextual. So what you should be focusing on, unless you want to go get a PhD in machine learning and go play in that field, that's awesome. But if you're just an ordinary business person, the thing that you should be focusing on is, how do I identify processes and articulate them in kind of natural language and in these sort of structured ways that I can then use to communicate with AI broadly. And as AI gets better, you know, that fundamental thing will be refined, but that fundamental thing is still, like, it's an exercise in learning how to look at the work you're doing or the work that the people around you are doing and define it in discrete ways and communicate it in ways that machines are able to take advantage of.
Mm-hmm. And obviously with AI, the role of the software developer, you know, evolves. Obviously, it evolves outside of anything we're doing with like co-pilots and you know models that can write code. And it also evolves in the enterprise. So in the enterprise, it used to be you either sort of build your own, and that means you need to either hire some development shop to do it, or you have your own developers, you know, build and maintain, you know, products and roadmaps and such. Or you adopt a no-code, low-code platform, sort of the last generation of these platforms. And on one hand, that enables your non-developer employees, business users, to build applications. On the other hand, like if anybody's used, you know, these low-code platforms, no-code, low-code platforms, you realize that the amount of work required to actually build things that are meaningful is oftentimes much more work than simply having written the code. And so on one hand, you have a bottleneck of developers that are required to build stuff. On the other hand, your business users, you know, have to do a tremendous amount of work and learn to use these very sophisticated tools. And because, again, in the old world of development, you had to sort of like think about and cover all, you know, edge cases, let's say, and sort of enumerate them and you know, build rules for them. We live in a fuzzy world now with AI where you can generally tell it your, you know, sensibilities and it can make a lot of assumptions, and then you can sort of fine tune that and give it some additional constraints. So just a very different way of building these applications. And that makes, again, building them radically more accessible. Many more people can learn to do it. It makes building them, you know, ludicrously faster. Again, sort of 15 minutes to a couple of hours. You're not going to build anything meaningful with a no-code platform in a couple of hours, but here you do. And by the way, these things can be deployed, you know, when you build them in our, you know, web IDE and test them and preview them, and then, you know, you push publish. They get packaged as web applications, right? So they're you know, accessible via a URL, and they can sort of be in two flavors. One is they can have human interfaces. So for, let's say, employees to use, so like a regular web app, so have input output in the form of, you know, images and text and media and forms, or they can be headless, you know, specifically meant to be driven via, you know, some other process, programmatic, the API calls. And obviously those are the ones that are primarily used for automation. And so oftentimes we see people, you know, triggering them either, again, sort of from their own custom software and calling our APIs, or using things like Zapier or Make.com, these things that allow you to create sort of these event listeners, triggers, they typically call them, and then, call some process, in this case, our API endpoint, and start that off. And so you can build components. And we make that accessible to non-technical people that don't even know what API means, but they understand what it needs to do. And so they can build that. And then they use Zapier and and route it to it. And all of a sudden you've got, software development for the modern day.
That sounds awesome. Actually, we do have like a question. Let's try to pick that up first. So for data analytics, there was a say to 4-stage: describe, diagnose, predict, prescribe. With the advent of GenAI, do you see this evolving or changing?
Sorry, you broke up on my end. I couldn't quite hear it.
It's in the Q&A tab, Dmitry, if you want to open it.
Uh-huh.
So,
Okay.
so there's 4-stage for data analytics: describe, diagnose, predict, and prescribe. Do you see this will change with the GenAI?
I'm sorry, I don't
I
do
think
it.
this is a good example of kind of what we've been talking around, which is like generative AI, and a little bit what Dmitry was describing with its ability to accept kind of fuzziness and impreciseness actually allows us to focus on these foundations where, it's great if you sit in a data analytics course and they tell you, oh, there's 4 stages to data analytics: describe, diagnose, predict, prescribe. And then you spend 90% of your day sitting in a Jupyter notebook trying to debug, 3 lines of code, and you don't actually get to focus on those kind of foundational, high-level conceptual abstractions that actually make the work valuable, because you're so mired in trying to connect everything and get it to work precisely. So I think, yeah, moving forward, and I think this applies to a lot of advances we're seeing in software development, and what Dmitry was speaking to with the evolution of these no-code or low-code builders, we actually have space for a renewed focus on what problem is it we're solving and why are we solving it, rather than the world we live in now, which is like, okay, great, we can do that, but then we need to actually devote the majority of our time toward doing the actual implementation work and diving in the weeds. Now that paradigm is a bit inverted, where we get to spend most of our time describing the problem and figuring things out and figuring out the right way to articulate it. And then the implementation detail is more hand-wavy in that sense.
Oh, by the way, I
Yeah.
apologize. I found the tab. I was looking at the chat tab and Q&A tab. I'm like, where is this question? Sorry about that.
That's awesome. Then let's switch in the gear a little bit to talk about a vector database. I actually heard you guys had different thoughts initially. Instead of like choosing our fully managed vector database, you are thinking about to build something yourself. So I would love to hear what exactly happened. What made you feel, oh, actually, I need a fully managed vector database over there?
I think because the benefits outweighed the cost required to build and roll it ourselves. I mean, that was, I think, probably the biggest thing that went into our choice to use Zillis, was just that you guys have been around for a long time and very stable and no nonsense and fleshed out. And yeah, it's been a very, very positive experience so far, especially because we're building out kind of this multi-tenant solution where on a single cluster we are serving a lot of different clients data, and we're loading and unloading dynamically based on usage patterns of our users. And so having kind of access to the lower level database versus some of these kind of newer, trendier services where you don't have as much visibility into that was actually really important to us. So I think it's unfortunately not the answer is that Zillis was boring and stable, and that was why we chose you, which is unfortunately, I think, not as fun of an answer as it could be, but I think it's actually a really important answer. And I think it speaks to the, values that we have as a company when choosing technologies to make a bet on.
Mhm.
as a data infrastructure company, we love to be boring.
Yeah, that's actually the greatest compliment, that Sean and I can lob it at anyone is boring means you're not trying hard to impress, you just work. And that's our approach as well. We try to be boring old infrastructure that just lets people do amazing things.
Yeah, and I think if you're delivering real value to people, as you guys clearly are, then you don't need to dress it up with all the other stuff.
So do you want to talk a little bit more about a multi-tenancy? We heard this a lot from the community, especially lots of GenAI app. They want to build this kind of multi-tenancy way, but they face like lots of challenges. So would love to hear a little bit about your approach.
Yeah, I think probably the most important context before we dive too deep into that is just the shape of our production traffic and workloads, which is we have a lot of users, and as Dmitry mentioned, the majority of them are building kind of internal facing enterprise applications. So, Dmitry, you can probably speak a little better than I can to types of data that people are uploading into their data sources that we are storing. But the gist of it is that we're not doing a lot of like high read workflows. So and there's a lot of kind of like someone might build out a sales training assistant, and as part of that they'll upload a lot of conversations and product manuals and all kinds of things like that into the data source for their application, and then that application might be used during predictable hours during the work week and only be used by a few people to make a few queries here and there. So we can do some simple kind of heuristics on top of that usage and dynamically load and unload the data from the vector database. So I think that's been the biggest thing that's allowed us to do multi-tenancy in a pretty scalable and cost-effective way, has just been that we don't have the constraint of all of our customers' data needs to be loaded into memory 100% of the time. So yeah, we load things in and out pretty aggressively. And the other thing too is that we've basically built out adapters in such a way that for our enterprise clients who do demand or do require rather that their data be accessible at all times and be loaded into memory, we can just let them, plug into their own whatever reserved instance if they want to do that and move off of the shared infrastructure.
Cool. The other sort of question I have is when we talk to the community, most of the people, when they build RAG, they use some sort of framework, let's say LangChain, Llama Index, to make the whole process much easier. What I've heard is you guys actually not adopting that approach. I would love to hear the rationale behind.
I think we didn't, honestly, implementing your guys' APIs was easier than learning how to use one of those frameworks and try and figure it out. I think it was, yeah, I this could be a whole separate conversation. Like the work that Llama Index and LangChain have done has been amazing, and I think is very valuable, especially for lots of developers who want to scaffold things up and get things going. We kind of wanted to march to the beat of our own drum a little bit and not find ourselves going down the paths that others had kind of drawn, especially given how fast this space is moving. So like I basically just wanted kind of some API endpoints to be able to load in data, query data, and manage it, and then we can compose that in the way we want to, rather than we're kind of locked into a pattern that's been prescribed in some other way. So I think like if you look at if you were to look at the architecture behind MindStudio, it's a lot of basically just at the core layer is all of these foundational services, the LLMs, the vector databases, as well as just generic kind of less exciting tech things like just third-party APIs that let you do things, or scrape websites, or user management, whatever. And then us building kind of adapters on top of that and then composing those. So in effect, we're doing a similar thing to what some of these frameworks are doing. And because of that, it felt important to basically own and define our own pathways to that infrastructure. And then, in some sense, I think you could think about what MindStudio is a basically no code version of something like a LangChain, for it's opinionated in some senses, but I think much more accessible than, because I think, and I mean this in the nicest way, like if you know enough about programming to integrate and implement LangChain, you might find yourself getting frustrated enough that you end up just doing the thing yourself, versus where we sit, which is, most of our users have never seen a line of code in their life and have no desire to ever touch a line of code in their life. So I think we can get away with a lot more in terms of being opinionated about the way we express access to our tools than something that sits a little closer to like raw programming.
I think a follow-up question for me for that is, or as Dmitry mentioned earlier, you just really don't want your user to worry about the newest kind of attack, the model, etc. How are you make sure you can keep evolving and just like do the best thing for them? Because it's hard, just like keep up with technology to go so fast.
Yeah, I think that's where us being able to leverage the economies of scale that come from sitting at this unique vantage point come into play. So if you're just some of our customers are like random, restaurants in random parts of it. They're not technical. They don't want to sit there and read news about, benchmarks on different models and doing things. But we actually can. We have the resources to be able to sit and implement all of these things and look out at the world and decide what's happening. The other thing that I think becomes interesting moving forward, for certain types of customers that want to opt into these sorts of things is cost saving and efficiency, that we will be able to basically look at different models relative to prices and relative to specific actions in workflows and help customers pick, what is the most effective thing for me to do here. Like we had, because a lot of people just don't know, like we had, Dmitry and I had a call this morning with a customer who they were trying to troubleshoot a data source. And they had built this whole data source to upload one, maybe like 50-line text file into it and vectorize that and put that into Zillis and be querying it. And it's like, okay, that's awesome that it's so easy for you to do that, that you're not thinking about all of the steps required to do this. But at the same time, really what you should be doing and what, our automated tooling in the future should catch and help you do is you can just paste that into a prompt if that's how you want to access it. Like that doesn't need to be used in this way. So helping these end users, not only access all of these things, but help them understand when they don't need to be using things or when they'd actually be better off using something else. That's, I think, a common pattern we've seen with customers is they show up and they want to use all the latest and greatest everything. They want to use, GPT-4 Turbo and Claude 3 Opus, and they want to vectorize. We've had people show up and been like, I have 12 million words. Why can't I do that? And I'm like, okay, do you actually need any of this stuff? And the answer most of the time is no. And we've actually found kind of an interesting correlation between how deep people go into learning MindStudio and playing with things and building the applications and their kind of jadedness with the shininess of the new technologies. Like a lot of these people who start out using expensive models and building complicated workflows over time find that actually they would rather have lower latency, use a smaller model for certain actions and then bring in GPT-4 at the end to synthesize all of this stuff, or, be more thoughtful rather than let me take every single file on my company's shared hard drive and just dump it into this thing and pray that it works. I'm actually going to be a little more thoughtful about what are the data sources that I'm choosing to include, and what are the ways in which I invoke them? And can I do something like, split them up into maybe 3 separate databases and based on the, classify the user's intent first before querying those. So I think you get a little bit more of the kind of sophistication you see as it actually tracks pretty well toward kind of seniority in programming is kind of the analog that comes to mind of like junior developers getting excited about all these new frameworks and all these new tools and building these crazy things versus, you know, the jaded gray-haired senior engineer who just wants to write as little and as boring code as possible to get something done.
Cool. Let's get back to the vector database for one more question. I think the community would love to hear if you ever encounter any issues when you start to use Zillis, and if there's anything we could do better to help you guys.
I don't think so. I think there were a few places where, and this may have been resolved, but where the documentation between Milvus and Zillis wasn't quite in sync. So I would be like trying to use some parameter and I'm like, why isn't this working? But you know, that's I think the fun of implementing any new technology. No, I think we've had a really smooth, great experience so far. You know, it does what it says it's supposed to do, and it does it really reliably. And yeah, it's been great. It's nice, especially in such a complex and you know, wide-reaching software product as MindStudio. Anytime there are things where I'm like, I can set this up, and then I don't need to, you know, set a mental reminder to check up on it every couple of days because I just trust that it's going to work. That's I'm beyond grateful for that. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's actually, I mean, you guys don't know us, but like we're that's rare to get us to feel like that. Mostly we're bitching about something or another that we wish it was better. And so the fact that this thing just runs and we tend not to have to think about it is a big blessing. So we really appreciate it.
We're glad to hear that, and we'll let the doc team know. Actually, we had some improvement about the documentation, so if anyone wants to check it now, it should be a little bit better.
By the way, heads up, we are we're growing really, really rapidly, and therefore we're always playing catch up. And so our documentation is often out of date. Yeah. Fortunately, our support is awesome primarily in Discord, so jump in there. So don't be surprised if you're like, what is this? This interface doesn't exist. Oh, that's right, it's evolved. And so
probably bad karma for me to be complaining about quality of documentation.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. You weren't complaining. You were actually complimenting because ours is radically worse.
Okay, cool. With that, Dmitry, do you want to show a demo to the audience?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So let me show you a quick demo here. And by the way, the best way to get a demo here is like I'll tease you a bit, but the right way to do it is just to go to Learn over here and watch this 18-minute video or this 2-hour course. Or on our YouTube channel, there's a bunch of deep dives. We also host weekly webinars where we do basically sort of a version of this. And we host an advanced webinar where we show you how to integrate it, with things like Zapier and Make and things like that. And we do an 8-hour on Saturdays, like every other Saturday, certification cohort. And so you can take an 8-hour class and then complete a project and be graded and become a certified developer, because we now have a lot of people that are reaching out to us, enterprises that are reaching out to us wanting help in implementing these things again. And by the way, here's a quick matrix before I show you this demo of just, again, we're bubbling up some like common patterns that we tend to see of like what people are doing with MindStudio, what kinds of things are they building? So, take a look at that, and that's super helpful as well. Okay, so once you've, signed up or, continued with Google or Apple or email, you basically get an interface like this. One thing you get by default is basically a replacement for again, ChatGPT or any other model that you want to use. By default here, it's GPT 3.5 Turbo, but I can edit it and completely change what model. My default, this is my conversational assistant. Again, it's made to just replace my use of large language models directly because I can do it here and because I can edit it, and it can be trained either by me or by my enterprise on what we do and what my job function is. It can be much smarter about that. And then you can hit plus and to create more tabs here. Obviously, I've got a bunch of things that I've created, but you would just have this Create AI button, and you can click that. And so you can start creation of AI in a number of ways. Well, first of all, I'm about to show you in this next screen sort of the anatomy of these AI applications, but part of that anatomy is think of it as like a system message, a prompt that sets the context for this AI thing you're building. Like, what is it? What is it supposed to do? And generally, how should it behave? And you can do that either by choosing a template, or you can do that by telling the AI what it is you're trying to build in just some words, and it will automatically, using AI, generate this prompt. Or you can just start from scratch. It's actually not completely blank, but mostly blank, and that's what I'll do. And so it gives you sort of this blank prompt. The role of the assistant is to help the user by responding to their requests. That doesn't really say anything because you didn't even have to say that, but this is sort of the thing. Okay, so now you get our IDE. It's basically broken up into like 3 columns, left, middle, right. On the right-hand side, you've got this live preview, so you can chat with this thing as you're using it. On the left-hand side are various resources and, error detection and debugger. And then in the middle is kind of where the majority of the work happens. So an AI consists of, again, one or more of these things we call workflows. You get this main workflow, but you can add additional ones. And workflows consist of a system prompt, a default model that you get to choose, but you can override it with each step that you take. And by the way, you can also, using these custom functions that we allow you to do, call any on-premise model or, again, any other API endpoint. And primarily these things we call automations. And these are these multi-step workflows that are represented by these workflow things. And you add nodes to them by clicking this plus sign. And so they have a start, they have an end, and they have things that they do in the middle. And here you can create different types of nodes. I'll just quickly run you through some. If you're building an AI that is meant to be used by a human, let's say an employee, it's a tool for employees to use to generate some work product that they're doing, and so it requires some user screens, user inputs. And so you can use this user input block right here and create these different types of user inputs. On the right-hand side are these previews, things that are long text, short text, multiple choice, visual multiple choice, rating things. These are constantly sort of being extended of what you can do, and obviously manipulate them here, give them nice images. You can make these look really nice and create really nice forms, screens, basically, for people to use. The other thing you can do, of course, is you can send messages to models. And again, as I said, there's this default model here that you can choose, but at every step, you can override the default model of what model are you calling. In most AI applications that we see people build now, use multiple models, and typically from different providers. And we make it really easy to do. They don't even need their own API keys. All of these are just multi-tenants on our API keys, and then we just bill you for usage. And so you can use, Anthropic and OpenAI and Mistral and Meta and all of that, and then send them messages. And then you can, send them messages as a user or as a system. And then the response can either be displayed to the user or can be assigned to a variable and then sort of piped through to, other things. The other thing you can do is you can go to this data sources area and say plus, and you can upload a data source, upload files and create a data source. I'm going to zoom in. Here's upload PDF, CSV, Excel, text, doc, anything textual directly from your computer. We set a limit here that you can ask us to override, but just sort of for abuse protection, but like 500,000 words and up to 150 files simultaneously. I'm just going to upload one, and I happen to have a copy here of the text of The Art of War. It's about 60,000 words, and I can say open. And as soon as I do that, we basically start taking this thing, uploading it, parsing it, and creating vector embeddings. You can see the progress that's happening here. And then once this has been vectorized here in a moment, we'll be able to sort of browse through the text, the vector embeddings, see the chunks. And then I'll go back to the main flow. And of course, I could have just done that if I was doing this for real. I didn't want to watch this and go start to implement the query block, but I just want to sort of have you guys watch this as it's happening behind the scenes. And obviously, again, so this can be used by completely non-technical people. We now have thousands, tens of thousands of people that have learned to use this vectorization without doing it. Okay, so we've now created almost 140,000 vectors. We can click on this little thing here. And again, see the preview, see the extracted text, see the chunks, see the raw vectors. And then we can reference a query this data source by this query data block, and then choosing the source, giving it the output variable name, specifying how many results, and basically creating this query template to be able to extract what we want. Other things you can do here is you can create and run custom functions. And so we've got, first you can browse our community of functions. This is sort of kind of like Zapier has, over 6,000. We've got like 36 of these, but you're welcome to use them directly from here. And again, here you see like things like Airtable and Calendly and sort of general fetch requests and image generation, stable diffusion, Dolly, YouTube, Google search, things like that. Or you can, create and write your own functions and test them and sort of do all of that directly in here in this IDE and create tests, run them, and call them here. And you can also create things like menus, for example. And as you create menus, you can then, take those menus and then create multiple workflows and call them, logic blocks, things like that. Throughout all of this, you get to sort of see errors that still exist. As you run this thing, you get a debugger, so you can trace stuff. You can preview this at any moment as a draft in another tab. Again, these are just like web applications. And then you can publish them. And as you publish them, you get to provide some metadata. This is also the place where you would, set your, be able to get your API keys if you're going to deploy this as a headless AI. You can embed these. So there's like thousands of websites now that embed these directly on their website and mostly create like a customer service or sales assistance or things like that. And then you publish it, and once you publish it, you get a URL, and you get a web application. And yeah, that's generally it. Again, there's a lot more to it, but you guys can find that on your own time and dive into that.
That looks really awesome. I guess the next things we would love to know is like, what are some of the exciting features on the roadmap? Actually, Tom was asked like same questions. What you plan for expanding the capability of MindStudio, and how do you envision it evolves to meet the changing needs of the AI development landscape?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the first thing I think that Sean touched upon and I touched upon that I'll bring back, I think is like really important, is to understand like how we see where we sit and like where we draw the lines, like what are the abstractions that we are creating. So we believe, obviously, that forever and ever, we will continue to see, accelerating innovation in sort of the different layers of the AI stack. Innovation and sort of this like infrastructure and hardware layer that we're already seeing with the stock price of NVIDIA going up and up and up, and the demand for compute, and lots of innovation there on rack density and cooling and all this stuff that data centers need to be able to run this. So there's going to be continued innovation there. We don't play any part in it, but we leverage all of that, and we assume that that's going to keep going faster and faster and get cheaper and cheaper. On top of that infrastructure layer, we call this next layer the intelligence layer, and the intelligence layer has all the models today and moving forward. That too is moving ludicrously fast. Like if that's all you do is like track the space, it's impossible to keep up. Every week, massive innovations and changes. 2 weeks ago, GPT-4 Turbo was the thing. Then all of a sudden, Anthropic launched their latest model, and all of a sudden everybody's like, no, you got to switch. That's the latest model. And next week it's going to be something else. And also, obviously, in this case, meaning in the case of AI models, open source is clearly going to play a massive role in sort of the evolution of this. And so that's already happening, and we believe that will continue to be the case and get even stronger. And also, as enterprises start to implement these things, they start to realize that for most things, you don't need large language models. You would be much better served by taking a small model, being able to fine-tune it sort of on an ongoing basis. It's much more performant, lower latency. You can run it yourself, so you get better security, compliance, whatever. You can keep it fresh, sort of retrain it much more often. And so we believe all of that will continue to evolve. We don't play in that layer either. We intentionally sit one layer above that, where we are the gateway to those layers. We're the application layer sitting on top of those things, and never want to pick winners there. Simply want to allow our users to be able to leverage all the power now and in the future of however that evolution happens. So hopefully that makes sense. So like there's going to be tremendous amount of change there, but MindStudio supports it now and will support it moving forward, because all models are basically just metered cloud services. They're things that are meant to be accessible to developers or consumers, and we are the abstraction layer for that. Okay, so the places where
sorry, quickly, Dmitry, I wanted to interrupt and kind of just share to that effect. So like this is something it's just visually fun, so I feel like worth sharing right now, which is something we released last week called the Profiler. And what the Profiler does is let you run the same input through multiple LLMs or through the same model with different settings at the same time, in order to actually be able to visualize, write me a poem, to actually visualize the differences between these models in terms of speed and output and cost and stuff like that, in order to help end users make more informed choices about what it is they're using. Because it's one thing to read about all these advancements and read about benchmarks and comparisons and watch the videos. It's another thing to be able to see it with your own eyes in your specific unique workflow. So it's just a fun thing that you can see all of these side by side like that.
Yeah, and you can keep adding more and more of these. At the bottom left, there are new profiles. So like you can run a lot of these simultaneously and show Sean where you change the model on each one of those. You can just click on that and choose the model, choose other parameters, and run it with that. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, this is, by the way, a really powerful tool. It's a bit hidden. It's in these workflows, and then this like middle section here. It's called Profiler. So take note of that. This too, I think, is now documented, but we're catching up on all of that. Okay. So our the place where we spend our time is in this abstraction layer and this application layer of AI. And so we commit to being able to support any model, because all models are callable via APIs, and that's how we use them. By the way, when new models that we already support, these Anthropic, Google, Meta, Mistral, OpenAI, when they come out, if they come out sort of during our waking hours, we tend to announce that it's already supported 15 minutes after they've been released, meaning we put them in our list and allow you to call them via API. And so check. The other thing is, again, it is clear that for many enterprises specifically, that they will be, using their own models and connecting to private clouds, on-premise, things like that. And so today we have to periodically, they reach out to us and ask us how to do it, but soon we'll make it even easier for them to be able to do that in these like model settings of configure your own API keys and call your own models on this. We are working on, like, we've got everything obviously running, being used by over 40,000 of these AIs deployed, but there's still a bunch of sort of finish work to do, and that's where we're spending our time right now, is making it more robust, making it more easy to use, providing enterprises with more capabilities that they need from a compliance standpoint and privacy standpoint. A lot of this, like, logging, auditing, things like that are possible, but still sort of require some work on their part. We're going to make it much easier for them. Logging in enterprises of all of this AI usage, especially once you've done all the automations and you've done the created custom business apps for enterprise users, and you've given them these specialized assistants, and now you can see all of that as it flows through the enterprise. That's a lot of really valuable data. Today, it gets stored, but there's not much you can do with it, at least through us. But soon, we'll be building this business intelligence component to it, where we will make it easier for enterprises to keep an eye on that data and sort of proactively watch it and detect all kinds of things, primarily inefficiencies of, like, even though you've automated a bunch of things, here's a bunch of things your employees are doing manually that we might want to automate, including, by the way, obviously, we'd have a capability of sort of pre-creating the app form and say, here's the automation already created. Do you want to deploy it? So things like that. So this business intelligence thing is a big thing. On leveraging these models, as I mentioned, most of the AIs that are being created today already use multiple models, and oftentimes models from different providers. But today, the builder, the person creating the AI, this business user in some enterprise, needs to make decisions on, like, what model should I use for this step? And while we help them with this profiler tool, for example, to be able to compare things and play around and create constraints and do that, certainly it makes sense to make that sort of more assistive and intelligent, where we can propose that this model for this step of the process would be the right model, and here its parameters, and it's already sort of been pre-tuned for you to do that. You don't have to think about that stuff. The other thing that is really powerful, and we will make even more powerful, is so these model providers tend to go up and down, right? Like, their reliability still is a bit wonky. Again, early days of this, expected. So, there's a few fail whales that happen. And, enterprises complain that, like, oh, I've been using GPT-4 and it's down. And today we make it easy for them to just, like, open up the AI and switch that, just drop down, switch it to another model and go. But certainly we can make that much better and have automatic failover and fault tolerance and optimization for basically quality, latency, and price, and sort of intelligent way of doing that. So that's another area. We're a small team, so at this moment we've got sort of finite things in mind, but we are growing our team, and so as we get bigger, I think we'll start to dream a bit further out.
We have about 1 minute left. Let's try to answer David's question. What do you think is the future of abstraction use cases? For example, 1 or 2 years from now, will GenAI to be progressively more visible to business user? What's your opinion?
Sorry, what's the future of abstraction as models evolve, capabilities of models evolve? Is that the question?
It's like a GenAI will be more invisible to business user. Do you think so?
Probably, yes. Meaning,
I think from the spirit of, like, will it be more sort of naturally and intuitively baked into tools and workflows, rather than a little bit of what we see today, which is like you go to a Google Docs and you try and write something, and there's, the 2024 equivalent of Microsoft Clippy saying, hey, do you want to use AI to do this?
Yeah. Today, AI is front and center, because it's cool, right? And so everybody's sort of putting, and again, the way people think about AI, we've been conditioned by the release of ChatGPT that AI is a chatbot, that you chat with this. And that's simply because that's the way it was packaged. Obviously, AI is not a chatbot. And so people tend to think of it as it's this thing that assists you and you can chat with, and when you build applications with it, it's this like model thing that you put into a workflow. I'm certain that over time, and probably 2 years is in today's world, and this world is, I think, is a very, very long time, that AI is going to be much less sort of in your face and doing things behind the scenes, and that most users will never think about, oh, I need to use AI, or how do I build things with AI? The people who are responsible for making organizations operate efficiently, right? So again, our targets when we go and all of our stuff is inbound today. As I mentioned, we don't have direct salespeople, but there's a bunch of agencies, for example, that are now starting to, IT integration agencies and things like that, who are starting to build AIs for enterprises using MindStudio. And as they go out and they talk to these enterprises, they have to sort of retrain them to think of AI in this right way, that AI shouldn't be something that employees generally are thinking about or learning to use. Like, you don't need to teach anybody to do prompt engineering. You, the person responsible for enabling your organization to operate efficiently, whether you're an operations manager, or sometimes now you get this like title chief AI officer, or you are sort of sales enablement, or customer support enablement, or whatever. You're like these people inside these organizations that are responsible for operational efficiency. You are the only ones that should ever think about AI. And AI is simply this like thing that you can sort of throw into these various types of workflows that you're creating, of these apps you're creating, and it just does these things. So I think that very quickly, the general concept of how we even sort of think about and say what is AI is going to change quite dramatically.
That's very insightful. And we're at the hour. Thank you so much, Dmitry and Sean, for providing us the story of MindStudio. And I hope we'll talk with you guys sometime soon.
Yeah, thanks for having us. And thanks everyone for joining. Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
great
Bye-bye.